She buried both parents in the same year, sold the family home, started over by the beach. Then her brother walked into her condo, stole her keys, and told her she was broke. But Amelia didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply sent one text: "Check Dad's Jefferson file." 3 minutes later, he called back in panic, because hidden inside that file was a secret capable of flipping the entire inheritance upside down. Over the next 28 days, one wealthy Southern family would unravel publicly, and the ending shocked everyone at that beach reception.
My name is Clara Hayes. I'm 33, and in just 1 year, I buried both my parents. I sold our family house in Boston and bought a small condo in Marblehead, a short walk from the harbour. On my second morning there, before I'd even unpacked a single box, my stepbrother, Ethan, walked in, snatched my keys from the hook, and put them in his pocket.
"You can't swing this," he said flatly. "I'm heading to Newport tomorrow with Sophia's family."
"I'll drop you at a shelter." I didn't say anything. An hour later, I texted him 6 words. "Check Dad's old surveyor's box." He called me back in under 2 minutes. But what happened over the next 4 weeks, that was the twist nobody, least of all me, saw coming. Welcome back. This channel is for women who set boundaries the right way with documentation, dignity, and the courage to stay quiet while everyone else is screaming. If you've been the one doing all the hard work while the rest of your family just waits for an inheritance, this story is for you. Drop a comment, subscribe, and stick with me. You will not believe what happens at that waterfront wedding. The 14 months before my mother died were the longest of my life. Stage 4 lung cancer. By the time they caught it, treatment was for comfort, not a cure. I asked my director at the university archive, where I'd worked for 10 years, if I could switch to remote work. He agreed without hesitation, so I packed up my laptop and scanner and moved into the guest room of our old colonial. My mother's name was Helen. She was a history teacher for 30 years before she got sick. We had to turn my old bedroom into a makeshift hospice suite. The hospital bed arrived on a Monday. The low hum of the oxygen concentrator became the soundtrack to our lives for the next year. I learned how to change a cannula at 3 a.m. in total darkness. I figured out which pharmacy delivered the cheapest medical supplies. I learned my mother's hand squeeze could say, "I love you," when her voice was gone. My stepbrother Ethan visited exactly twice. I need to be clear about that, because later on everyone said people grieve in their own way. 2 visits in 14 months for maybe an hour each time. His wife, Sophia, never once stepped inside the house. One time she just sat in their Lexus in the driveway with the engine running while he came inside. He only stayed for 30 minutes that day. I wasn't angry back then. Anger requires an energy I just didn't have. My entire world was a legal pad on the counter, with lists like order more gauze and refill prescription. The real me, the one with feelings, was packed away somewhere. I told myself I'd deal with her later. In reality, Dad died first, a massive heart attack that winter. He was out shoveling the front walk. Our neighbour found him by the steps. I rushed home from the library and just sat with him on the cold stone until the paramedics came. Mum watched from the living room window, too weak to come out. She didn't really break down until 2 days later, when we were choosing a casket. She laid her hand on a simple pine box and whispered, "He would have hated all that fancy hardware." After that, it was just us, just me, her, the history books she could no longer read, and the illness. Mom passed away in September on a crisp morning, with her hand on top of mine. The hospice nurse, a kind woman named Maria, sat with me for 2 hours after. She didn't say a word, she just stayed. I will always be grateful for that. The funeral was that Friday at a small chapel by the water. Overcast, about 50 people in dark coats. I'd handled everything myself, the eulogy, the music, the soloist. I'd written the obituary at 2 a.m. over a cold cup of tea. Ethan arrived 25 minutes late. Sophia was driving, and the first thing she said was, "I told you the traffic on the bridge would be a nightmare." She kissed the air by my cheek. "Clara," she whispered, "I'm just so sorry for your loss." It was the most personal sentence she'd ever said to me. Ethan hugged me. I let him. He smelled of expensive whiskies that didn't suit him at all. He'd gained weight and his eyes were bloodshot. He cried during the service, and Sophia patted his arms twice. Later, people came back to the house for sandwiches. I hired a local college student to help serve. I was rinsing mugs at the sink when Sophia cornered me. She had a woman with her I'd never met in her 60s, perfectly dressed. Sophia introduced her as her mother, Isabel Moreau. She drove up from Newport just for this. Isabel took my hand. "My dear, we are so terribly sorry." Her grip was like a vice holding on a second too long. Then Sophia asked, completely casual, "Clara, did your mom happen to say anything about her jewellery? Any of the family pieces?" I set down the mug I was washing. I didn't answer. I just picked up the empty cookie tray, walked it to the dining room, and refilled it. When I got back to the kitchen, Ethan was standing in the doorway, watching me. He had come down from the second floor, from the hallway near my dad's office. I hadn't even seen him go up there. "You okay?" I asked him. "Yeah," he said, his eyes scanning the room, "just looking around." 2 months later, we were all sitting in the conference room of Davies and Stern, the small law firm in downtown Boston that managed my parents' estate. Mr. Davies read the will out loud. He was in his 70s, kind, the sort of lawyer who still wore a bow tie. The will was clear. The house in Boston and all its contents went to me. A specific clause, notarized a year before Mom died, stated the bequest recognized my role as sole caregiver for both parents. The investment accounts, life insurance, my dad's car, and their savings were split 60-40, with the largest share going to Ethan. Mr. Davies explained the values were roughly equal, considering the house's appraisal. The intent was balance. Ethan's face went bright red. He said nothing. But Sophia did. Her hand went up. "Mr. Davies, sorry. So this is the only valid version? There's no earlier one?" Mr. Davies said, "This is the final executed will." Sophia gave a slow nod. "Got it. Just making sure." I didn't say a word in that room. I signed the papers, shook his hand, and walked out to the parking garage. Ethan and Sophia followed right behind me. At my car, Sophia caught up and put her hand on my forearm. Her diamond ring was new, the stone much larger than I remembered. "Clara," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, "we should all talk. A family meeting. Let's be honest about splitting this so no one feels weird." I looked at her hand on my arm, then at her face. "The will is what Dad wrote," I told her. I didn't. Her smile tightened as she let go. That afternoon, I went back to the lawyers and got certified copies of everything. Then I drove to my bank and rented a safe deposit box. I slid the copies inside myself. Back at the house that night, I found a small iron key on a hook in the pantry, the key to my dad's old sea chest in the attic. I didn't open it, not yet. 4 months passed. I lived there alone, working from the dining room table. I kept Dad's office door shut. I left Mom's reading chair empty by the fireplace. It took 3 cycles of washing the sheets in my old room before the medicinal smell finally faded. One Saturday in April, I was standing in the living room holding a coffee cup, just staring at the dark wood panelling. Dad had always wanted to paint it. I suddenly knew I couldn't spend another day there. The house wasn't my home anymore. It was a museum of grief, and I was the only person visiting. I called a real estate agent that Monday. We listed on Thursday and held an open house that Sunday. We had 4 offers by Tuesday. I accepted the highest. A young couple expecting their first child. The wife grew up just a few streets away. $650,000 with a 30-day closing. I didn't bother telling Ethan until the contract was signed. I called him from my car in a takeout parking lot, the kind of call where you don't want a long debate. "You're selling Mom and Dad's house?" His voice was tight. "It's not their house anymore," I said. "The will says it's mine, and I can't stay there. I'm using the money to buy a place in Marblehead." A long pause. I heard Sophia's muffled voice in the background. When Ethan came back on the line, he sounded totally different. "Sweetheart," he said, a word he'd never used with me before. "We need to talk about that inheritance. Sophia and I have some ideas, and we could really use—" "I gotta go," I interrupted, and I hung up. I should have known right then and there. Any normal brother would have warned me, but I'd spent a year pretending not to drown. And you can't just quit pretending, so I kept moving. I packed the house in 6 weeks, found the condo in Marblehead in 2. Closed with cash, $480,000 for a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor with a small balcony overlooking the harbour. Moving day was the first weekend of June. I hadn't opened the sea chest. I almost did, twice, but decided to wait. The movers were gone by 1 p.m. The only 2 pieces of furniture I kept were my mom's reading chair and my dad's old cedar sea chest. I watched them load the chest onto the truck myself, to be sure it wasn't scratched. It sat in the corner of his workshop my entire childhood. He made it back in '91 from old-growth pine. 22 inches long, 16 wide, 10 deep, with brass fittings. He'd even set a small lock with a tiny brass key. The movers placed it on a shelf in my bedroom closet. I shut the door, and the pine scent was trapped inside like a memory. After they drove off, I just stood on the balcony. The place is tiny, 640 square feet, 1 bedroom. A narrow kitchen, a balcony that just fits 2 chairs. It isn't the ocean, it's the sound, but you can smell the salt water from up here. On a good day, you can see the lighthouse on the point. The condo fees were $315 a month. I had run the numbers 4 separate times. I could swing it on my salary. I had actually pulled it off. When evening came, I walked down to the shore. The June sun hung low and golden. I sat on the sand in my work clothes and just let the wind whip my hair around my face. And for the first time in 5 months since my mom passed, I cried. Not the messy, ugly kind, just quiet tears that came on their own. I felt the grief. But underneath it there was something else, a lightness. Like I'd finally put down some heavy luggage I'd carried for decades. I could just walk on without it. That night I slept for 9 solid hours. The first real 9 hours in over a year. I'd given Leo the visitor code for the lobby 2 weeks ago. When he asked, he'd called, offering to help me move in. I told him no, but the offer felt like a kind gesture. So I gave him the code anyway. For emergencies, he'd said, "Great, I'll put it in my phone." I thought that tomorrow I would wake up completely free. The pine chest sat in my closet. I told myself I'd open it on Saturday. I finally had the space for it. Sunday morning, June 2nd. I woke at 7, poured some coffee, and carried the mug out to the balcony. The water was like glass. A single heron stood in the shallows about 200 yards out, perfectly still, just doing what herons do at 7 a.m. I sat there in my robe, watching the steam curl up from my mug. I thought, I could do this every morning for the rest of my life. At 9:14, a blue Range Rover pulled into the visitor parking. I noticed because the lot was empty, and it parked sideways across 2 spots, exactly like Leo always parks. I watched from my balcony. Leo got out, in a golf shirt and khakis. Then his passenger door opened, Savannah, in a white sundress and carrying a huge leather purse. They walked toward the entrance. Leo typed the visitor code into the panel. I had given him that code 2 weeks ago for emergencies. I watched him use it now as if he owned the building, and I felt a knot slowly tighten in my stomach. The knock on my door came 40 seconds later. They took the elevator straight up. No text from the parking lot, no call from the lobby, no heads up last night that they were even in town. They just appeared. I opened the door, still wearing my robe. Leo walked right past me into my living room. He looked around the place like he was inspecting it, then plopped down in my new armchair. Savannah followed him in. She shut the door behind her. Then she turned the deadbolt, locking it without a word. Then she gave me that placid smile, the exact one she wore at the funeral. "This is so sweet, Chloe," Savannah said. "Really adorable." I should have known from the ways he sat down, the way she locked my front door, the way he set his sunglasses on my coffee table next to my book, like it was his own. I still poured them both a cup of coffee, the kind of person I was on the 1st of June. Leo took the mug but didn't drink from it. He set it on the table and leaned back. "So look," he began, "Savannah and I were talking last night. And Chloe, honestly, this whole thing, this condo, this move, it's a bit much for you to handle." This is a lot of overhead and a big mortgage for one person who just lost both their parents. It's 640 square feet, I said. And I did the math. Savannah chimed in, her voice dripping with pity. Honey, it's just too much for you right now. We've been so worried. Leo got up and walked to the small table by the door where I kept my keys in a ceramic bowl. 2 keys on one ring, for the front door and the mailbox. He picked them up, glanced at them, then slid them deep into his jacket pocket and zipped it shut. I watched him do it. You don't need this place, Leo said, turning back to me. He was using the same tone our dad used when the dog chewed a shoe. Tomorrow, I'm driving up to the lake for the week with Savannah's family. I can drop you off at a women's shelter on the way. Savannah nodded. Just for a little while so we can figure all this out calmly. Bart said he could help us get the condo listed. I cocked my head. Bart? My brother, the real estate agent. He thinks we can get $380,000 for it. Maybe even $400. Just let us handle this for you, sweetie. I noticed her phone was lit up on the sofa beside her, an unsent text message draft. The recipient was Bart. The message read, 417, Soundfront, Unit 412. She's in. My address. She saw me looking and quickly flipped the phone over. I didn't say anything. Then I said, okay. They both just looked at me, completely stunned. Okay? Leo asked. You have the keys, I said. So I guess we're finished here. For a full 30 seconds, nobody said a word. I think they were expecting me to argue or start crying or plead. That's what the old Chloe would have done. The worn-out girl, still deep in her grief. I'm sure Savannah had a whole script ready. Talk of mediation, what's best for the family, a comforting hand on my shoulder. But I just stood there, holding my mug. Chloe, Savannah said, her voice cautious. We are only trying to... What's best for you? I know, I said. Leo looked over at his wife. She glanced at her phone, still face down. He looked back at me. So you're fine with this? He asked. You're fine with us taking over? I think you two should leave, I said. You have a long drive to the lake house tomorrow. You'll want to get some rest. Chloe, honey. Savannah tried one more time, stepping towards me as if for a hug. I took a single step back. It wasn't dramatic, just a neat retreat into the kitchen, putting the counter between us. She stopped cold. Fine, she said, her voice suddenly crisp. Fine. We'll call you tonight. We will get this handled. They walked out. Leo took his sunglasses off my coffee table. Savannah grabbed her enormous purse and her phone. He hesitated at the door, as if he was searching for something paternal to say, but came up empty. And then he left. The deadbolt was still engaged from when Savannah had locked it. I turned it, opened the door, and watched them walk to the elevator bank. He stabbed the down button without a backward glance. The doors slid shut. I closed my own door. I locked the deadbolt myself this time. Then I went to a kitchen drawer and pulled out a plastic baggie I had taped to the back panel. Inside was my other set of keys to the condo. I'd had them cut the day I got the title. A decade managing estates for the city's wealthiest families teaches you to always have a backup. I sat down, poured myself another coffee. Then I picked up my phone and opened Leo's contact info. I stared at his picture, an old photo of him at 17, his arm around my shoulders on his graduation day. I was 12 then. I'd cropped it so it was just the two of us, no parents in the background. Back when I actually liked having a big brother. I tapped the message field and typed 5 words. Look in Dad's old pine box. I reread it, and then I hit send. 4 minutes went by. 4 minutes and 12 seconds, if the microwave clock was right. My phone buzzed. Liga's name lit up the screen. I ignored it, silenced the phone, and then I called Eleanor Hayes' personal cell. Eleanor was the senior partner at Hayes & Associates. She gave me my first job 10 years ago when I was 23, with nothing on my resume but a paralegal certificate. She's the one who taught me how to contest a trust, what a codicil was for, how to scan a property deed for flaws in 90 seconds. She was 58, twice divorced, and she always picked up her phone, even on a Sunday. Chloe, what happened? He showed up, I said. He took my keys. He threatened to drive me to a shelter. There was a brief silence on her end, the kind a lawyer makes when she's deciding whether to be your lawyer or your friend. "Okay," she said. "My office. Monday morning, 8:30. Bring your phone, bring the text messages. Do not answer his calls. Don't engage. Just let this play out. It's already in motion." My lawyer's voice was steady. "The will is in safe deposit box 247 at Irongate. Get the certified copies." "I will," I said, and hung up. I took out a legal pad, one I'd brought from the old house. I used to use it for Dad's medication schedule. Now, the list was for me. Monday, Irongate 247, Eleanor 8:30. Concierge, do not let Leo up. Rekey the locks tonight. I drew 2 thick lines under that last item. I called Ocean View Lock and Key and made a 5 p.m. appointment. The first voicemail from Leo came in at 11:43. It was 1 of 5 that day. I let every call go to voicemail, writing down the time of each one. After I listened, I wrote a short summary of each message. I never called him back. 11:43. Chloe, what pine chest? I don't know what you're talking about. Call me back. This is ridiculous. My note, confused, trying to sound casual. 12:17. Okay, I'm not playing these games. Savannah thinks you're just trying to cause drama. Call me. My note, getting angry. I could almost hear Savannah feeding him lines. 1:55. I just got off the phone with Savannah's mom. She agrees you're being ungrateful. I told her you've had a rough year. Call. My note, bringing in reinforcements. Using Margaret. 4:22. Chloe. If I don't hear from you by tonight, I'm calling my lawyer. I swear to God, we have rights in this too. My note, a bluff. It was an accidental text. 8:09 p.m. I'm driving to Corolla tomorrow. If that chest is in the old condo, I'm grabbing it. Whatever she thinks is inside, it's not just hers. You can't hoard family property. I read it twice. Not because I was shocked, but to get the exact words from my lawyer, Caroline. I screenshotted the whole thing. It's not just hers. I stared at that line. He had no idea the sale of the condo closed last week. The new family was already there. That old sea chest wasn't on Archer Lane anymore. It was safe on the top shelf of my closet. He would find an empty condo and a new father painting the walls blue for a nursery. At 5 p.m. sharp, the locksmith arrived. 45 minutes and $200 later, I had a new deadbolt and 2 new keys. I tucked them in a kitchen drawer. The next morning, I drove 2 hours to the coast to open safety deposit box 247. The First National branch was dead for a Monday. I had called ahead. Maria, the manager I'd known forever, walked me back to the vault. No chit-chat. She unlocked the heavy door, slid out the box, placed it on the table, and quietly slipped out. I took a breath and put on my glasses. I lifted the heavy steel lid. 3 things inside. First, a certified copy of my parents' last will, signed the August before Dad passed, and the addendum, signed in October, just weeks before his cancer diagnosis became terminal. The language was crystal clear about Tate condo, its contents, and the reason. In recognition of our daughter Iris S.'s role as primary caregiver. An attached statement from their lawyer, Alan Pierce, confirmed my parents were of sound mind and not under any duress. The second item was a letter from my mother. 2 pages on her personal stationery, in her elegant script, dated just 6 weeks before she died. It started, "Iris, my love, your father and I see who really held this family together." She wrote for 2 pages, calm and direct, about how she and Dad had been watching. They saw who visited the hospital back in 2020 when she broke her hip. They saw who called every single Sunday without fail. They saw who put their own life on hold for over a year and never once complained. The last line of the letter was direct. "Don't let your brother take this place from you. It is yours. Promise me." The third item was a sealed manila envelope. My father's handwriting on the front said, "Iris, read this only when you must. Not a moment sooner." I didn't open it. Not yet. I put it back with the will and Mom's letter and took pictures of everything with my phone, every singled page, front and back. Before I even stepped out of the vault, I emailed the photos to Caroline. I locked the metal box back up. These documents didn't smell like old paper. They smelled like cold steel and finality, like the truth. 2 days later, my apartment buzzer screamed. Not the lobby one, the one right at my door, which meant somebody had tailgated their way in. I looked through the peephole. It was Evelyn Croft, standing there in a crisp floral dress, holding a bakery box. She saw the peephole darken and smiled. "Iris, dear, it's Evelyn. Can I please come in for a minute?" I opened the door, but just a crack. "How did you get up here?" "Oh, a nice young man in the elevator let me follow him. I told him I was visiting my son's lovely sister. I let her in, but only as far as the foyer. I shut the door behind her, then led her to the small balcony and gestured to a chair. I stayed standing, keeping the sliding glass door wide open. She set the bakery box on the little table. It had a sticker from the corner bakery. "They're still warm," she said. "Cinnamon rolls. My special recipe for stressful times." How thoughtful. For the next 20 minutes, she talked about grace and forgiveness. She talked about how Trent was just heartbroken. She talked about how regret is a terrible thing to carry into your golden years. She mentioned finding common ground. She called me dear 12 times. I was keeping a tally. Finally, she leaned forward, putting a hand on my arm. "Iris, honey," she said, "families shouldn't keep secrets from each other. We all just want to heal." I sidestepped that completely. Instead, I asked, "Mrs. Croft, should I put these in the kitchen?" She blinked, losing her rhythm. "Oh, yes, that would be wonderful, dear." I took the box inside. On the counter I saw a folded note tucked under the string. I peeked without untying it. 3 words in her looping script. "Call your brother." I left the note right where it was, went back to the balcony and stood by the door. "Mrs. Croft," I said, "I think it's time for you to go." She left. That night, my phone went crazy. I'd been pulled back into the family group chat, the Croft crew. I had quietly removed myself months ago, just for some peace. They just added me back. The members, Trent, his wife Diane, his mother Evelyn, Diane's older brother Brad, his wife Laura, and some cousin from Arizona I'd never met, named Mark. It was 6 of them against me. 47 messages in 2 hours. Diane, 8:13. "Hey Iris, we're all just so worried. Please let us know you're okay." Trent, 8:15. "Iris, come on." Evelyn, 8:20. "Family, let's remember grief is a process. We must be patient with Iris, but also firm. She needs our guidance." Brad, 8:31. "Hey Iris, quick note. I run Croft Realty. I can get that condo listed in 48 hours. Have a buyer lined up. Just say the word." I stared at that. A sales pitch in the grief chat. Diane, 9:06. She was always the golden child. Now she's just selfish. "Sorry, but it's true." Evelyn, 9:10. Diane, 9:11. "I said I was sorry." Laura, 9:22. "Sending love and light to you all." Mark, 9:45. "Just catching up. So sorry you all are going through this. Iris, sweetie, remember family is forever. Stuff is just stuff." I screenshotted every single message and emailed them in batches to Caroline. I muted the chat, but I didn't leave it. Caroline had told me not to. "Let them talk," she'd said. "Let them put everything in writing. That's exactly what we want." That night, I sat on my balcony listening to the waves. The lights from the other beachfront condos glowed below me. The new residents' welcome party was this Saturday. I knew they would all be there. If you've been following my story, you can probably guess what's coming next. That moment when the quiet one finally shows her cards. To feel it with me, drop a 1-word comment. Just type condo so I know you're here. And please hit subscribe. The party was 6 days away. Wednesday at 8:30 a.m, I was back in Caroline's office at Hayes and Miller. She had cleared her entire morning. On her dual monitors, she reviewed the will, the addendum, Mom's letter, my transcripts of Trent's texts, all 47's chat screenshots, the lobby security footage from Sunday that David the concierge sent over, and the realty listing screenshot I'd found on Diane's social media page. Caroline scribbled notes on a yellow legal pad, just like the one I use. We had the same law professor, years apart. She put down her pen. "Iris, your case is airtight," she said. "There is no legal claim here. The will is explicit. The witnesses are solid, and the lawyer's statement is ironclad. Trent can hire an attorney. He probably won't, but he could, and any decent lawyer will tell him to drop it immediately. Diane's brother is exposed for illegal solicitation under state real estate law. Diane could be sued for slander, for spreading lies to your neighbours. We won't sue. We send cease and desist letters. We document absolutely everything, and then we move on with our lives. Okay, I'll have those letters drafted by Friday. 4 separate envelopes, one for each of them, ready to be served. She paused, taking off her glasses. Iris, can I ask you something as a friend? Not just your lawyer. Of course. Why didn't you do this 6 months ago? I thought about it. I was just exhausted, I said, and I wanted them to be better. I kept hoping if I just stayed quiet, Trent might finally read the will and our mom's letter and choose to be my brother again. I didn't want to be the one to start the war. She nodded. And now, she said, now I want you to be my +1 on Saturday at 6 p.m. for that condo welcome party. She gave a tiny smile, just a little smirk at the corner of her mouth. Iris, I'd love to. That same Wednesday at 2:14 p.m, my phone buzzed. A security notification from my building's lobby camera. A visitor was at the desk for Unit 412. I tapped it open. It was Trent, standing at the front desk. Behind him stood a man in a blue work shirt with a logo, holding a small tool bag. The logo read Colt Lock and Key, the same company I had just used. I almost laughed out loud. Of all the locksmiths in Corolla, and there are only 4, Trent managed to pick the one whose number was already saved in my phone from Sunday night. I called Robert at the front desk. Do not let him up here, I said. He has absolutely no authorization. Yes, ma'am, Robert said. I switched the app back to the live camera feed and watched the whole drama on mute. Trent was arguing, his face was turning red, his hands were waving everywhere. The locksmith just stood behind him, looking bored, like a man who has seen this exact scene play out 100 times before. Robert said something calmly, gesturing with one hand. Trent slammed his palm down on the marble desk. The locksmith took a small step back. After about 8 minutes, the locksmith said something to Trent, shook his head, and walked right out the front door. Trent stayed for another 4 minutes, arguing with no one. Then Robert picked up his desk phone, and I felt my own phone buzz in my hand. Mrs. Utton, your brother is demanding a key from the building's master file. I told him we don't have one. You don't? I asked. The locks were changed Sunday. Yes, ma'am. I know. He's also claiming you're emotionally fragile and that he's bockles weird for you. I'm fine, David. I'm just sitting on my balcony watching him on the security feed. David chuckled. All right then, I'll show him out. The keys my cousin Trent had swiped from my table were now useless. My new set was in a kitchen drawer, taped where I couldn't miss them. I'd had the same company he used rekey the deadbolt that very afternoon. I kept the receipt, and I was about to be very glad I did. Thursday morning, getting into the elevator for the mailroom, the doors opened on 3, and an older woman, maybe 70, stepped in. She had short white hair, stylish gold glasses, and a tote bag from a local library. I'd seen her around. Hi, she said, Eleanor Holcomb. I'm in 306. Amelia Vance, 18B. She studied my face. Amelia, she said, I think we need to talk before Saturday's reception. The doors opened to the lobby, and we walked out. She nodded at David, then led me to a quiet seating area by the windows. Honey, Eleanor said, patting the cushion next to her, I have had 2 different women in this building call me about you this week. Both were asking if you seemed okay, if I'd noticed anything. They both said a woman named Sharon called them, pretending to be concerned for you. Sharon claimed you'd just lost your parents and were unstable. She wanted to know if any neighbours had seen you acting strangely. My jaw went tight. That's my cousin's mother-in-law. Eleanor nodded slowly. I thought so. I was a court reporter in Norfolk for 31 years before I moved here. Amelia, a smear campaign when I hear one. She tried it on me, too. I told her I'd only just met you. You seemed perfectly lovely, and that she should find a more interesting hobby. I actually managed a smile, the first one in days. The reception is Saturday at 6, Eleanor said. I'm at table 4. I have an empty seat right next to me. It's yours. Bring your lawyer. I have a feeling you have one. I do. Then you're all set, sweetheart. I'll have the chair waiting. She patted my arm, stood and walked off with her library bag. I just watched her go, stunned. Back in my apartment, I laid out my navy dress for Saturday. That evening, as the sky went from blue to grey, I opened my bedroom closet and pulled the cedar lock box from the top shelf. I set it on the floor, sitting cross-legged before it like I was a little kid again on Christmas morning. The smell of cedar filled the room, like a breath finally released. It smelled like my dad's workshop of sawdust and wood resin. I had to close my eyes for a second. I unlocked it with the small brass key and lifted the lid. I'd put Mom's main envelope in a safety deposit box, but I hadn't touched anything inside this cedar box when I moved. This box held my dad's keepsakes, his old watch, his wedding band, a few photos of him as a young man in uniform, a tiny wooden bird he carved the year I was born. Everything was right where it should be. But inside the lid, tucked into a canvas pocket I had never once noticed, was another envelope. Cream paper, Mom's handwriting. The message was the same. Amelia, read when you need it, and not a moment sooner. She'd made a backup, just in case. I pulled it out. I broke the wax seal. 2 pages. The letter was calm, clear, written in her familiar grocery list scrawl. It said that when I read this, someone would be telling me I owed them more than the will stated. And they'd wrap those demands in words like family and love. She told me not to believe it. She wrote, "Your father and I wrote that will with our eyes wide open. We saw who showed up for us, and we saw Sue didn't. Setting a boundary is not a betrayal, Amelia. It's the last gift I can give you." I read the letter 3 times. That Friday, my lawyer Jessica emailed the drafts. 4 separate cease and desist letters on her firm's letterhead. Each one was specific. Each one was signed. Letter A was for my cousin Trent. It detailed his illegal actions, entering my home, stealing my keys, trying to change the locks, the threatening voicemails. It demanded he stop all contact, except through our attorneys. It would be sent certified mail. Letter B was for his wife, Chloe. The same basic warning, but this one included the unauthorized real estate listing he'd drafted, which Jessica had screenshotted from some public realtor portal I didn't even know existed. Letter C was to Sharon. Cease and desist. It included a separate paragraph about the violation of privacy for calling my neighbours to spread lies about my mental health. Jessica had cited the exact state statute. I read the citation twice. It felt good. Letter D was for Greg with a cease and desist, plus a draft complaint to the State Real Estate Commission. A copy was attached regarding the coercion of a relative to get a listing. I printed all 4 of them. I addressed each one by hand, just to make it a little more personal. I sealed them in 4 clean, white, legal-sized envelopes, labelled in crisp black ink. I put 4 of them in my canvas tote bag, the same one I'd taken to the bank, the one that still smelled faintly of cedar. I called Jessica at 4 o'clock. Saturday at 6 is a go. Meet me in the lobby at 5:45. I'll be in a navy dress. I'll be in a black blazer, she said, so we'll coordinate. I laughed, then almost cried because I hadn't laughed like that in months. I went to bed early that night, with the tote bag sitting on the chair right by my bed, the letters tucked safely inside. I wouldn't hand them out unless I had no other choice, only if all 4 of them showed up to the party and tried to cause a scene. Jessica and I had a plan, and I knew, with that gut feeling you just can't shake, that they were going to force my hand. Saturday I was up at 6:15. The sky was pale silver. The seabirds' butts were back. I made coffee and scrambled some eggs, eating at the little table by the balcony door. I'd already laid out the dress. Navy blue, knee-length, with 3/4 sleeves, and low black heels that wouldn't make me tower over Jessica. My mother's small pearl earrings were the only jewellery I'd taken from the old house before it was sold. I read Mom's letter again at the kitchen table. I read Dad's once more. I put them both back in the cedar box and locked it. At 5:30, Eleanor knocked on my door. I told her I'd meet her downstairs at 5:45. She was already in the lobby, wearing a crisp pantsuit and a simple gold necklace, looking like a lawyer who'd never lost a case. "You ready, kiddo?" "I hope so." She studied my face for a second, then gave me a firm nod. As we got in the elevator, the floor numbers lit up, counting us down. It was just the two of us inside. Eleanor looked at me. You have nothing to prove to them tonight? Amelia, remember, you own your home. They are just visitors. I don't need to prove I belong, I whispered, mostly to Mitsu myself. I just have to remember that I do. She smiled gently as the doors slid open to the lobby. Jessica was already there by the main desk, a slim leather briefcase under her arm. So was David, the doorman, who gave me a subtle thumbs up that meant the world to me, and so was Leo and Chloe. And Sharon, clutching a huge potted orchid with a tacky ribbon wrapped around it. And there was Greg in his shiny realtor's blazer with a cheap brokerage pin on the lapel. They were all there, just waiting. This is the part of the story I've replayed in my mind 1,000 times. If you've ever been made to feel like you're the problem by your own family, this is the moment you dream of. If any of this sounds painfully familiar, hit that subscribe button before we walk into this ambush. And tell me in the comments, who's the Sharon in your family? The grand lobby of the Waterford Residences had been turned into a makeshift party venue. 6 round tables with white tablecloths, simple vases of baby's breath, a giant charcuterie board, and pitchers of sparkling cider. Smooth jazz was playing from some hidden speaker, the kind of music that's made to be ignored. About 40 residents were chatting older couples, and a few young families from the 5th floor with their kids. Mrs. Peterson, the HOA president, a sharp woman in her 60s who used to be a CPA, tapped her glass. She called for everyone's attention to welcome the 3 new residents who had moved in that month. And finally, she said with a big smile, our newest neighbour, Amelia Vance, in Unit 18B. Amelia, give us a little wave! I waved, and a polite ripple of applause went through the room. I sat down at Eleanor's table, number 4. Jessica sat on my left, Eleanor on my right. 2 chairs at our table stayed empty. At 6:20, the main lobby doors swung open. Sharon came in first, holding that orchid out like a weapon. Leo followed, then Chloe, then Greg the realtor. They weren't on the list. They weren't residents. Sharon marched right for Mrs. Peterson. We're so sorry to bother you, Mrs. Albright. We're Maya's family, just here to show our support. Mrs. Albright, thrown for a loop, did the only polite thing she could. She welcomed them inside. Catherine placed a small sculpture on the bar next to the champagne, the same sculpture from last month, the one she gave me with a nasty little note tucked inside. She brought it back tonight like a declaration. Beside me, my lawyer sir didn't even flinch. On my other side, my friend Helen sat perfectly still. I didn't move. The string quartet played on. Olivia scanned the gallery until her eyes found me. She started our way, wearing that fake, sugary smile. Ethan followed. Catherine followed. David trailed behind them, eyeing a painting like a shark. Catherine made it to our table first, but she didn't sit down. She put one hand on the back of the empty chair next to me, gripping it like she was on trial. Maya, darling, she said, her voice carrying across the entire gallery. We have to talk. Sweetheart, you can't just ignore your family. It's not good for you, and it is terribly unfair to your brother. At least 30 people turned to stare at us. The music played on, completely oblivious. Ethan came up beside her, looking absolutely exhausted like a man who'd been dragged there by his wife and mother against his will. Maya, he said, you took my half. You funded this show with our inheritance. You owe me a conversation. That's all I am asking for. Olivia was on his other side. She did that thing she did at the funeral, a delicate hand to her chest, her eyes instantly filling with tears. We have been trying so hard to be patient with you, Maya. You won't take our calls. David, over by the bar, gave Mrs. Albright a practiced smile, the kind of calm a man who sells art for a living has perfected. We're just here to mediate, ma'am. Nobody wants any trouble. Catherine's voice got even louder. Darling, she said, good families don't have secrets. You need to be the adult here. You don't need this art show more than your brother's kids do. The line landed exactly as she'd planned. The same words Ethan had screamed at me in my own studio just last week. You didn't need this. Now it was just dressed up as a mother's concern in front of 50 stage rangers. To my right, Helen slowly set down her glass of wine. To my left, Sarah was a statue. I looked at Catherine. I looked at Ethan. I looked at Olivia. Then I looked at David, who at least had the good sense to look away when I met his gaze. The room was holding its breath. I reached down for the leather portfolio at my feet and lifted it onto my lap. I unzipped it. The string quartet finally ended their piece on a long, sad note, and a new one didn't start. I pulled 4 large envelopes from the portfolio, each one labelled by hand in black marker. I placed the portfolio on the floor, stood up, and took 5 steps to the centre of the room where they stood. I handed the first envelope to Ethan. He took it automatically, the way you take a program at a show. He didn't open it, just stared at me. I handed the second envelope to Olivia. She held it with both hands, like it was a delicate, unwanted bomb. I gave the third envelope to Catherine. Her hand trembled just a little as she took it. She was no longer gripping the chair. She clutched the envelope to her chest. Finally, I gave the last one to David. He took it, glanced down at the name on the front, and his face did something it was never meant to do in public. It went completely pale. I kept my voice quiet and steady. The room was so still you could hear the soft hum of the gallery lights. Inside each of these envelopes, I said, is the one thing you've been more demanding from me. The truth, that's all I said. Sarah then stepped forward from our table. She already had her business card in her hand. She placed it on the bar right in front of Ethan. Sarah Croft, she said, partner at Croft Legal. I'm Maya's counsel. I would strongly advise you all to review those documents before saying another word. Ethan hesitantly tore open his envelope. The revised will was sitting right on top. He stared at the cover page for a few seconds, then flipped to the amendment. He read the clause about the art studio. He turned to our father's letter, 2 pages of his messy handwriting on letterhead, and his expression just crumbled in a way I hadn't seen since the memorial. For a brief moment, his eyes glistened with tears. Dad wrote this, he whispered, his voice cracking. I just nodded. His lip began to tremble. He was about to speak, maybe to me, maybe to no one. Olivia snatched the letter from his hand. She's faking it! Ethan, these are forgeries! He slowly came back to himself, shaking his head. Olivia, he said softly, that's his handwriting. She spun on him, her face twisting into a nasty scowl. Ethan, don't you dare be weak. She is playing you. We went through this. Catherine had her own envelope open by now, holding the cease and desist order in one hand and Sarah's card in the other, her mouth wide open. David had put his envelope down on the bar and was now staring at the floor. Catherine was the first to recover. She did what guilty people do when they're trapped. She got louder. This is a setup. You brought us here to embarrass us in front of everyone. I did not raise my voice. I stood my ground. Catherine, I said, using her first name, none of you were invited here tonight. You introduced yourselves to Mrs. Albright as my family. There are 50 witnesses who heard you say it. At our table, Helen stood up. She was 71 years old and barely 5 feet tall, but she stared at Catherine with the authority of a federal judge. I heard her say it, Helen's voice rang out. Mrs. Albright heard her say it. The critic from the city paper heard her say it. Mrs. Albright, by the doorway, gave a single sharp nod. That is correct, I did. Olivia had switched her to tactics. The angry scowl was gone, replaced by theatrical tears that started instantly. Maya, you have no idea what this has done to our family, to Ethan. He cries himself to sleep. Don't you even care? Do you know the weight he has been carrying? I looked over at Ethan, who stared at his feet. Olivia, I said, is the only person in this menagerie who has cried about my father in front of me since he passed away. My father. Ethan visited him 3 times in the last year. The longest visit was 30 minutes. By the bar, David tried to play the role of peacemaker. Hey, look, why don't we all take this outside? Cool off for a minute. No one is going anywhere, Sarah said. Her voice was calm, conversational, but it carried across the silent gallery. The cease and desist order is effective now. Any future contact with my client will be handled by my office. The packet you are holding has my direct line. I'll be available to talk on Monday morning. Catherine held the envelope up to Sarah. This is completely insane. You can't just— Actually, I can, Sarah said, and I already have. Mrs. Vance, the restraining order for harassment is right there on page 2. Catherine fell silent. Ethan hadn't moved an inch. He was folding his letter back up with the slow, deliberate hands of a man folding a flag at a memorial. He tucked the letter into his inside jacket pocket. Catherine found her voice again, breathing hard. What do you have to say for yourself, Maya? In front of everyone, look at them all staring at you. And I did. I looked around the room. 50 artists, collectors, my new neighbours, people I might work alongside for the next 20 years if I was lucky. All of them were still in their seats. All of them were watching. I looked at Ethan. He looked right back at me. His eyes were red. He wasn't going to say he was sorry. I could see it. I could see all the years of his life right there, his wife pulling on his arm, the credit card debt, the failed music career, the kids he had with Olivia, the life he never got. The man he might have been was still in there somewhere, but he'd been buried for a long, long time. I looked at Catherine. The will explained everything, I told her quietly. You just chose not to listen. I turned around. I walked back to my table. I sat down right between Helen and Sarah. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then Olivia grabbed Ethan's arm and yanked him toward the exit. He didn't fight her. Catherine grabbed her purse from the floor. She turned back for her ridiculous sculpture. David, who hadn't been told what to do, instinctively picked up the awful little sculpture and just held it. Catherine blew right past him, heading for the door. David trailed after her, still holding the sculpture. The doors swung shut behind them. 4 seconds of total silence. Then Helen clapped her hands, just once, a sharp, quiet sound. Mrs. Albright cleared her throat. Well, she said, shall we pour some more wine? 28 days went by. The 4 cease and desist letters were delivered by courier the next day. The signed receipts were back within a week. Ethan hired a lawyer downtown who called Sarah back in 48 hours, politely stating that his client would have no further contact. The lawyer billed Ethan $750 and told him to move on. Olivia blocked me on social media. David's gallery suddenly had no room in its upcoming schedule for my work. The State Arts Council opened an inquiry into David's business practices and sent him a formal warning letter. No suspension. Catherine sent me a single greeting card with a sad-looking puppy on the front. I read it once and didn't reply. I put it in a shoebox in my closet, next to my father's old paint brushes. Ethan sent 1 email. 4 lines, no subject. I read what Dad wrote. I'm sorry I didn't read it sooner. I want to bother you. Hope you're okay. I saved the email in a folder I called Archive. I did not respond. So here's the final tally for the month. $1,840 in legal bills and 4 letters served. But what did I get? $0 lost and 0 drama. It bought me peace in a quiet condo, 4 floors up, with a heavy door and a real deadbolt. On the 29th day, I opened that old cedar box again. I thought I knew every single thing in there, the small bird carving, her wedding band, the faded photos, even the canvas pocket with my Mom S letter. But that morning, just needing to feel my parents close, I lifted the felt lining at the bottom. Underneath it was a small velvet pouch, the deep red colour of old wine. I'd never laid eyes on it before. Inside that pouch was my mother's silver locket, the very one I was sure she'd sold with her other jewellery. But she kept it. She had hidden it for me. I clicked it open, and there I was 6 years old, sitting on my Dad S lap on our old front porch. I was holding a melting ice cream cone and he was laughing his head off. On the back of the velvet pouch, Mom had written just 3 lines for me. You are always enough, all by yourself. Don't ever forget. Love, Mom. I put the locket on. The chain was short and it settled right at my collarbone, exactly where it belonged. Family isn't about your last name. It's about who reads your father S last wishes and just gets it. And that S what happened to me. 1 lockbox, 4 nasty envelopes, 40 witnesses, and 1 beautiful locket I now wear every single day. If this story made you think twice about getting your own will updated or putting legal papers in a safe spot, please listen to that feeling. Let me know down in the comments and be sure to subscribe.